Hello there, wormies! April is Autism Month, and what better way to start out than by talking about autism story? Autism as a diagnosis is less than 100 years old, yet the twists and turns along the way are enough to fill a book an inch thick. What was there before patient 0, Donald Triplett, was diagnosed with autism? And how did we get to our day where people are freaking out over an apparent increase in autism diagnoses? Who are the key players along the way? In a Different Key is the story of autism written by award-winning journalists Donovan and Caren Zucker. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Hannah and I have autism and ADHD. I make weekly videos on this channel rating the representation of neurodiversity in the media so you can make an informed decision on what to read or watch. So hit that like and subscribe button to join the neurodiverse bookworm family and not miss out on a single recommendation. And yeah, I know I look different today. I don't usually do my makeup or my hair, but I'm practicing because I'm getting married here in, well, from when I recorded this, 2 months, but from the date of the posting, approximately a month. So don't mind the strange makeup and the hair, just so you know why I look a bit different. Anyway, In a Different Key is the story of autism. There's also a movie made by the same authors, Donovan and Caren Zucker, but I haven't watched this movie. I'll link you to the PBS documentary in the description, and I plan to watch it for Autism Month. To write the book In a Different Key, the authors dug through hundreds of resources, memoirs by parents and doctors, long-forgotten scientific writings and documentary films, newspaper clippings, archived documents, and they even conducted interviews with more than 200 people who have autism, people who've studied autism, and even parents who've raised autistic children. The story of autism is as hard to pin down as autism itself. It's a challenging story to tell. There's so many overlapping events and places that it might be hard to follow the story, but I believe the authors did an excellent job of organizing this book from the early prehistory days before autism was even a diagnosis to modern day and the birth of neurodiversity and self-advocacy movements. In a Different Key tells the story of parents and activists fighting to shift public attitudes from hiding away disabled people seen as shameful and less than human in these hellhole institutions to demanding, even going so far as to sue the state for access to mainstream public education and therapy services. In a Different Key goes back to the 1400s, long before autism was a diagnosis, to examine the stories of unique individuals that perhaps would fit a diagnosis today. For example, the holy fools who roamed Russia could possibly have been autistic if they had lived today. These holy fools were considered divine and like prophets, even going so far as to criticize tsars and get away with it. In a culture where few dared to question authority, their impertinence was reminiscent of the great prophets of the Old Testament. Paradoxically, a diagnosis of autism, had it existed 500 years ago, would have undermined the fools' credibility as pious citizens. awe and respect accrued to the fools only because it was assumed that they had deliberately chosen this harsh and isolating way of life. In later centuries, some self-appointed fools fell under suspicion for faking their piety, adopting certain behaviors only to advance their careers as beggars and con men. The resulting mistrust helped bring an end to the phenomenon of the holy fool. Gradually, the worship of and tolerance for such strange behaviors abated, and those who displayed such behaviors were once more neglected, if not treated with outright cruelty. And they go from these holy fools all the way through the centuries, examining stories of other unique individuals that, had they lived today, perhaps would have been diagnosed. In the early days of autism diagnoses, the mid-1900s, theories and treatments abounded that today we would consider outrageous. For example, some of you might have heard of the refrigerator mother theory that Bruno Bettelheim came up with in the 1960s. Listen to the words he used to describe autistic people: vicious, dangerous, devouring. These were some of Bettelheim's favorite expressions for conveying the causes and effects of autism. Autism, as he saw it, was a decision children made in response to the cold, nasty, threatening world in which they found themselves. Babies arrived fine and healthy, took a look around their lives, and realized they couldn't handle the ugly circumstances into which they'd been born. Before long, they deliberately proceeded to turn their backs on humanity and society in order to survive. Such a ridiculous theory. And while there may have been some apparent correlation between parents who appeared maybe more aloof, because autism is genetic, there's strong genetic ties, it's not the mother or the father or anything that the parent has done to cause autism. Several chapters are devoted to the discussion of applied behavior analysis, which is often wrongly attributed to Lovaas, although he was a major contributor to it. It was developed over a number of years by a team of researchers in California. And I love how they treat it. There's a discussion, there's lots of questions, and they tell the story. Some of them are really shocking. Literally shocking, because they used electric shocks, and it's not that far out of today's reality, because a few years ago there was a huge controversy about this home for disabled children. I believe it was called the Judge Rottenberg Center in Massachusetts, still using electric shocks. And when do the ends justify the means? This was reframed in the autism argument as an urgent and inseparable pair of questions. Was it wrong to use punishment to treat severely disabled people who are hurting themselves? Or was it wrong not to? Bernie Rimland, who's known as the father of autism advocacy, weighed in on the topic in 1988. While the use of electric shock on an autistic person is repugnant to me also, it is not nearly so repugnant as some of the things self-injurious people do to themselves, such as causing blindness, fracturing skulls, and in one case, chewing off both thumbs. And that's a hard question. I've pondered that, and how can you help them stop these behaviors without the use of painful stimuli like that? Is there a way to treat them as human beings and not like cattle? That's very degrading. So what do you think? When do the ends justify the means? How far do you go? I have no experience with this, and I think I would be very stumped if I had to answer this question of working with people who have severe self-harm compulsions. I don't understand as much as I would like to of this, and hopefully in my studies, in my master's and going on to PhD in neuropsychology, I'll come to understand this better, and perhaps I will be able to find better ways of connecting with these people and helping them to find ways to channel their self-injurious behavior into something that's less harmful. There was also another type of applied behavior analysis known as ABA that did not use these aversive methods. Let me read to you the story of Anne Marie and Taylor, her therapist that worked with her. "Look at me." Those were the words Bridget Taylor used to kick off the first of hundreds of hours of discrete trial sessions for Anne Marie. In the Me book, "Look at Me" is lesson 1, based on the premise that eye contact with a teacher assured attention, and that attention was a prerequisite to learning. That first day, Taylor sat with a weeping, struggling Anne Marie, who appeared deeply unhappy about this stranger making her sit back down whenever she tried to stand up and leave. Taylor sat in front of her, repeating the same phrase, "Look at me," over and over again. If Anne Marie looked at her, she got a goldfish cracker and a smile from Taylor, who called out delightedly, "Good looking, Anne Marie." Maurice, watching, was torn. Her motherly instinct was to intervene, to rescue Anne Marie from a situation that was obviously making her miserable day after day. In the first few weeks of it, she seriously considered pulling the plug and telling Taylor not to come back. But week by week, slowly at first, Maurice could see that Anne Marie was beginning to connect in new ways to the world around her. First, Anne Marie began looking at Taylor, then she was looking at her mother. She was learning to point, and to hug, and to use words again. A turning point was reached when Anne Marie's steady advances started to accelerate. More words came, more eye contact, and then, one day, when her mother was in the kitchen fixing a bottle for her baby brother, Anne Marie wandered in, calling out, "Mommy, Mommy!" truly seeking out her mother. A short time after that, once the ABA had been proceeding for several months, her parents took Anne Marie to one of the specialists who had confirmed her autism diagnosis at the start of this journey. The doctor was astonished at the progress the little girl had made and offered his opinion that in all the basic measurable skills, in communication, in social behavior, in motor skills, in daily living skills, Anne Marie has moved into the clearly normal range. In essence, after approximately half a year of intensive ABA, plus other therapies including speech and occupational therapy, Anne Marie's autistic behaviors were in retreat. Evaluations conducted roughly another 6 months later confirmed this, while allowing for the persistence of a few quite minor trace elements of autistic personality, referred to as residua, essentially leftovers. But in the important ways, in her connection to people and her ability to reason, to learn, and to grow independently, Anne Marie was one of the recovered. So how do you help autistic children learn the skills they need to function in society while not teaching them to mask and to act more normal? In my opinion, they should be taught as much as possible the skills they need for independence, but not training out of them behaviors that are society considers them weird behaviors that make them look autistic, but those behaviors really have nothing to do with the functioning of the autistic person in society. And in that case, it's society's job to adapt to the autistic person. And if it's not harming anything, then why should they change and mask those behaviors? In a Different Key presents both American and British research history. And interestingly, there is a noticeable difference in the priorities between American and British research goals. Americans sought to treat and even cure autism. Among the researchers in the United States, there was a sense of emergency, a drive to find solutions as soon as possible. In Britain, the approach was calmer, aimed more at finding an explanation for autism. Driven more by curiosity, British researchers sought to map the contours of autism and understand the autistic mind. And not only does the book talk about the research, it tells some of the background history of the researchers themselves, such as Hans Asperger, who this book tends to portray him as a Nazi, while a similar history book on the story of autism that I have read says there's little evidence, and it's hard to say. We're never going to really, I think, 100% definitively say whether he was one way or the other. I tend to think that the evidence is limited. He was a product of his time, and what I wish today is that people who use the term Asperger's do not see themselves as superior to other autistics, nor do other autistics dogpile on people who even mention the name Asperger's. And it shouldn't be such a divisive issue in the community. It's not worth it. There are also a couple of chapters devoted to early modern controversies, such as do vaccines cause autism and other environmental factors, the autism epidemic, whether it's due to these vaccines or just due to criteria being broadened. And there's also a discussion of Autism Speaks, its origins, and where the current controversy and hatred towards the organization comes from. I really appreciate the care that the authors took in presenting both sides of political and scientific controversies around autism, presenting different perspectives so that you can make your own opinion. They don't tell you what to believe. And the book ends with the birth of modern activism, self-representation on the internet, the Autism Aspie Pride movement, which I kind of mentioned earlier. The Aspies who are considered high functioning versus the low functioning autistics who cannot really advocate for themselves and need parents and caregivers to advocate for them. They deal with this topic as well in the book, and I believe it's done in a very sensitive, kind way to both sides. And I have given considerable thought to this, like, okay, how can we be mindful of the needs of those who are more severely affected by the condition, who can't advocate for themselves? And I don't know. I can relate to some of the things these people experience, but it seems like still a different world from my own, and I want to be very mindful of their experiences and remember that they are still people too. They talk in the book about the birth of the neurodiversity movement, websites and the internet, such as Wrong Planet or ASAN, and maybe you've heard of some of these famous early autistic self-advocates such as Jim Sinclair and Ari Ne'eman, who I believe is also working now in the government in disability rights and advocacy. Overall, I give in a different key a rating of 4.5. I believe it's a 5 in accuracy and authenticity, as they did their best to dig through a wide range of sources and present a wide range of perspectives. It's a 4 on diversity, since it's primarily North American and European research, but that can't really be avoided since that's where the primary centers of research for autism were. And even today, there's still a lack of understanding in Asian and African countries. I also rate in a different key a 5 on the thought-provoking scale and a 5 in accessibility. It's available on Amazon as an audiobook, and even though it's very thick and academic, it might be a little bit difficult for someone who's not a big reader to enjoy. If you don't want to read all of the details, there is a summarized autism timeline at the end of the book, where you have the basic dates and the major highlights. And this is an excellent overview of the history of autism. And as I said before, there's also a movie based on this book, which I will link to you in the description below. I'm grateful for all the progress that's been made in autism and disability rights, yet there's still so far to go until we reach a society that fully accepts us and integrates us as humans, giving us all the supports that we need to thrive, no questions asked. That would be so amazing if people could see disability as something that just is, and we're no longer awkward about it, but we have the supports and everyone is able to find their niche where they can thrive, not just survive or marginalized. So what do you think is next in the story of autism? Let me know down in the comments. And thanks for watching. Click here to see my latest review, and of course, don't forget to like, comment what you would like to see me review next, and subscribe so you don't miss the latest review.